Thank you all for joining. I wanted to start with a thought about Shavuos, and in particular related to Megillat Ruth, and the connection between the Megillah and Shavuos and the celebration of Matan Torah. I guess Shir last night got me thinking about Rus, and very interesting. Really, I want to focus on the first pasuk of the Megillah. That's all I really got through. But it's such a fascinating pasuk because it starts with I sort of see three parts of this pasuk, where the first part, Vayhi bimei shvot hashoftim, it was the time of the shoftim. That's part one. Part two, Vayhi ra'av ba'aret, that there was a famine in the land. And the third part of this pasuk, really, you could group together the entire rest of the book with what happened after the famine, Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz, that there was a famine, Vayelech ish mibeit lechem Yehuda, that this person went to the state Moab with his wife, and sort of the rest is history. And it's really striking and surprising why we need to know that it was a time of the Shvot HaShoftim at the beginning. And I think about it as really like in two ways. And I appreciate the Malbim here, which I want to show you a part of the Malbim. The Malbim sort of hits on the same things that I was thinking about, but I like to suggest an alternative answer. He asks, Lama yisaper shaya bimei shvot hashoftim. First of all, why does it matter that it's the time of the Shoftim? And second of all, if you're going to tell me it's the time of the Shoftim, why don't you say the name of the Shofet? And he says that basically the problem that the Megillah is hinting to is that all the problems occurred because of the weaknesses of the leadership. That the reason why they left Eretz Israel was because of the Ra'av. Why was there a Ra'av? Because there wasn't a strong leadership. I'm hinting to the pasuk in Shoftim, Bayamim Ahem Ein Melech B'Yisrael Ish Hayashar Be'inav Yaseh, that there was no king, there was no strong, centralized, consolidated leadership for the Jewish people at that time, and therefore there was sort of chaos and anarchy. Ish Hayashar Be'inav Yaseh, and there was no one. And there was no there wasn't even one particular shofet in charge of the whole nation. They were like splintered. And if there was a shofet, one strong shofet, who knows? Maybe he would have solved the problems. And the problem was that because of the famine, all the aniyim were coming to the rich people to beg for food and for money, and then the rich people had to give out their money and deplete their own resources, and because there was no order and law to control this, and therefore he left Eretz Yisrael. And in other words, if there was a better leadership, this all would have been solved. And I like to suggest an alternative to that, which is that even though there were shoftim, there was still a famine, hinting to the fact that, well, maybe if there was a strong leadership, they would have solved the famine, but maybe the famine is a natural occurrence beyond the ability of any shofet. I mean, you think about Yosef, who solved the famine, can't stop a famine, but he solved it. So maybe if there was a strong leadership, they would have been able to solve the problems that the famine presented. But maybe what the Megillah is saying is that there are certain parts of life and of the world that are beyond the control of the leadership. And we always want to trust our leaders to take care of us. But there are certain things in life that are beyond the capacity of leadership. And it sort of feels like that now also. Of course, the leadership is really important for us in addressing the challenges we have in our world now, but there's also some things that are beyond their capacity to really change. And the rest of the story is about an ish and ishto and banav. The rest of the story is about the heroism of the individuals who carried out all these great kindnesses. And I think the Megillah is trying to contrast by saying some things are beyond the purview of the leadership, and sometimes what really matters is what each individual person does in the circumstance that they're in, and they become models for us. And I also think about the story of Megillat Rus, that if it was today, it would probably be on like page 25 of the Jewish Link, like a story about this, what an interesting story about this individual. They weren't the leaders. They weren't, so much of Tanakh is about the kings and the leadership. And this book of Tanakh is not about the leaders, but it's about the individual people who make important decisions and do great things, and ultimately become role models to us. And how is this related to the holiday of Shavuos? So I think of Shavuos and the Kabbalah Torah in a very similar way. That um, I want to highlight a Mishnah Pirkei Avos, a familiar Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says there are three crowns in Judaism. There's the Keser Torah, Keser Kahuna, the Keser Malchus. That there's the crown of Torah, the crown of Kahuna, and the crown of Malchus, of kingship. The Keser Shem Tov Ola Al Gabeim. And the crown of a good name is above them all, and that's true. But these three crowns are always the crowns that are referred to in Chazal. And there's another parallel statement of Chazal, which says Shlosha Zeirin. There are three. A zer is a zer zahav. Is basically a crown on the kalim in the Beis Hamikdash, and there were three crowns: Shel Mizbeach, Shel Aron, Shel Shulchan. Shel Mizbeach zacha Aharon. The crown of the Mizbeach was taken by Aharon because the Mizbeach its parallel refers to the Kahuna. The Kohanim bring the Korbanos. Shel Shulchan, the Shulchan refers to the the bread, which is the sustaining physically the society. That's Zacha David, that refers to Keser Malchus, which was taken by David and his descendants. Shel Aron. What about the crown of the Aron, which contains the Torah and the Luchos? Munach Adayin Munachu. It's still up for grabs. It wasn't taken. Kol harotze likach yavo v'yikach. Whoever wants to take the Keser Torah can come and take it. In other words, the Keser Torah is for anybody. It's not specifically for people of a particular lineage, but it's for anybody. Shema Tomar Pachosu, lest you'll say that the Keser Torah is lesser because there's no yichus involved. Talmud Lomar, Bi Melachim Yimlochu. That in me, and God says, the kings will rule. In other words, the Torah is most important. So Torah has this quality of being for the masses, being for everybody. Very much like the Sefer of Rus, where we see the models of kindness and characteristics are not necessarily in the domain of the leader, be it the king or the shofet, but it lies in the common people. And another midrash that highlights this point about the Torah speaks to the fact that the Torah was not given in Eretz Yisrael, which you would have thought, if you didn't know the ending of the story and the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim, you would have thought they come to Eretz Yisrael, the promised land, they get the Torah, they build the Beis Hamikdash. Right? Why was the Torah given in the desert and not in Eretz Yisrael? And the Midrash gives two answers. One, Shalolitain Pischon Pelu Mosa Olam Lomar Lefisha Nitna Torah Ba'artso Lefikach Lo Kibanu Aleinu. You don't want to give it. God didn't want to give an answer to the other nations who would say, the reason why we never attach ourselves to the Torah is because it was given in this private place in this private nation. It's not for us. He gives it in the midbar to say that it's really accessible to anybody. And then the alternative, which is similar, shalolahatil machlokos ben hashvatim, to not make conflict between the different shvatim. Shelo yehei zeh omer bi'artzin in the Torah. No particular tribe should say the Torah is mine because it was given in my portion. V'zeh omer bi'artzin in the Torah. V'zeh omer bi'artzin in the Torah. Lefikach nitna Torah b'midbar. Dimus parhesia b'makom hefker. The Torah was given in this place of ownerlessness, where it's no one's in particular. It's no nations in particular per se. Anyone can come and join, and it's no tribe within the Jewish people because it's not designated for Shevet Yehuda or Shevet Levi, but it's for all people. So the Midrash highlights this point that Torah study is not specific for leadership. It's not specific for a certain lineage, but it's for everybody. And this is a great characteristic of Torah, which empowers every person to really create a Kabbalah Torah on Shavuos for ourselves and to strive for the Keser Torah for ourselves. But I always found this slightly problematic because you might say that the Torah is not for the elite of the kings. It's not for the elite of Shevet Levi. It's not for the elite of a certain lineage. It's just for the intellectual elite because it's not really necessarily accessible to everybody. Not everyone has the ability to learn, is smart enough. Not everyone enjoys it enough. Not everyone connects to it. It's not really for everyone in that way. But I like to suggest a little bit of a different way of thinking about it, and that is that first of all, we know the Mishnah in Peah that we say every morning in the daven, Elu Dvarim She'en Lam Shiur HaPeah VeHaBikurim VeHarayon Gemilas Chasadim VeTalmud Torah. That things that have no, it's ironic, right? There's no shear, there's no measure per se, are these mitzvos, that there's no amount. Peah, you leave a quarter of your field to the poor, there's no measurement how much of the corner it is. And the same thing with Gemilas Chasadim, no one says that you do chesed, you do what, a kazayas, a kabetza, an hour. There's no measurement for chesed and Talmud Torah. There's no measurement for Talmud Torah. And I think that there's a very important message in that. And I would like to combine that with one last source, which is the source in the Talmud, which tells us that we train children to do mitzvos. They're mandated to be to do mitzvos and to train to do those mitzvos from the age that they know how to do the mitzvos for children. So, for example, katan hayodeya l'naneya chayav belulav. A child who knows how to shake, which is not so simple, the 6 directions to memorize the order, etc. So once he's old enough to shake the lulav, you get him a lulav. L'tatev chayav b'tzitzis. When he's old enough to get dressed, you get him tzitzis. Lishmor tefillin. If he knows how to respect his tefillin, he should get tefillin. And a lot of the Mefarshim, I just want to highlight, say that, the nanuim, the shaking of the lulav, is not the core of the mitzvah. You really get the mitzvah just by holding it. So why does the Mishnah say, chayav lulav? And the answer is that the mitzvah of chinuch begins once you're old enough to do the mitzvah, but you have to be able to do the complete mitzvah with all the extras. So if nanuim was added to the mitzvah by the chachamim as an important thing to do in addition, so a child is only obligated to do this mitzvah once he can do the mitzvah fully. Look what the Brisa says at the end. Yodeya ledaber aviv lomdo Torah ukriyat shema. Once a child knows how to speak, his father teaches him Torah and kriyat shema. And the question is this: he knows how to speak. He doesn't know how to do the whole mitzvah perfectly. When it comes to lulav, he has to know how to do the mitzvah perfectly. When it comes to Talmud Torah, all he has to do is know how to talk. You repeat after me, Shema, Shema, Yisrael, Yisrael. That's enough to know how to do the mitzvah in completion. And the answer is really obvious. The answer is that how do you define the ability to learn Torah completely, to complete the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? It can't be that you learn the whole Torah, because no one can learn the whole Torah. So no child would ever be obligated to learn Torah as a child. When it comes to the mitzvah of learning Torah, like we said a minute ago, there's no shear, there's no amount. So if you can learn one word, that's a completion of Torah learning. So therefore, what's a complete mitzvah? The complete mitzvah is to do something. Ein lahem shir, the Torah has no amount of learning. There's no absolute amount that's the right amount to learn Torah. How much do you learn? Whatever you can. And if you can and you make it a meaningful experience, then one word of Torah could be your Keser Torah, could be your crown of Torah. Shavuos is about the crown of Torah, the crown of the opportunity that we have with Torah learning to try to engage it, and just the process of trying and the process of looking to understand what God wants of us, even if we can't understand it, because no one can, it's infinite. But that process is this extraordinary opportunity that was gifted to us on Shavuos. And like the Gemilas Chasadim, which is the focal point of Megillas Rus. The Talmud Torah of Shavuos is for every person, not the leader, not the people with yichus, but every person to engage and to find meaning in it. And as Chag HaShavuos is a day designated for Yizkor, appropriate, of course, Yizkor is for every holiday, but each holiday has its own aspect of why Yizkor is appropriate on that particular day. And of course, Talmud Torah is the quintessential Jewish experience, which is transmitted from parent to child. And that Talmud Torah, that teaching of the way of Judaism that's taught from parent to child, is true in every parent. Not every parent teaches the same amount of Torah words, but what Torah is really about is Amanas Lasos, to follow and to do the words of the Torah, and to live, and the lived Torah is really the focal point of what Torah is all about, what we're celebrating on Shavuos, and what we remember at Yizkor, so that those lessons we could remind ourselves of them and reinforce those memories and help them to carry us forward as we transmit this amazing Mesorah. Of course, we start Yizkor, like always, with the Azkaros for the martyrs of the Shoah and of the IDF. And I want to just say one word about these Azkaros, which is that I've been thinking about martyrdom because our community and our world is so focused on the value of health at this time during this pandemic, and we keep reinforcing the Jewish value of health. And when people phrase this value, we say it overrides all the mitzvos, or it overrides. I see a lot of people write it overrides almost all the mitzvos, or all the mitzvos except for three, because we know that there are three mitzvos that we're supposed to give our life for, and to accept or to choose martyrdom over those mitzvos, which are not to murder, not to do avodah zarah, and not to do incest, and gilui arayos. And so we say, well, it's greater than all the mitzvos, or 610 of the mitzvos, which is pretty high. It's like 99.7 percentile, because there's only three mitzvos that are greater. But I want to just suggest that we reframe that, because it's not that health is more important than all mitzvos except for a couple. It's a little bit different than that. If you think of an example of a person who let's say money is his highest value, and gaining money is more important, let's say, to a certain person, God forbid, but to a certain person, than anything else, and he misses his family smachot to make money, and he misses his children's events to make money, because money is his overriding value, and then he spends the money. So you don't say that money was less important than the thing that he bought. We say money is the most important thing to him, and then he chooses to spend it on certain things. That's the way that he uses his money. So in that same way, the value of the Torah of health is more important than anything else. It overrides all the mitzvos. And those three mitzvos, it's not that the health isn't important, but that's how we choose to spend our health, how to spend our lives. Health and our life is the most important thing, and then we want to make the choice of how to use our life and what to do with it, which is avodas Hashem. And martyrdom becomes a choice of how we spend our lives, and not just that it's not it's not just more important than our life, it's the purpose of our lives. And in that sense, the martyrs of the Shoah and all the Jewish martyrs of our history are people who made the choice, like we try to do also, who made the choice to live as Jews, knowing that sometimes we might have to pay the ultimate price, and they gave their life for that choice, and that's martyrdom. And the soldiers who fell in the IDF, and on behalf of the state of Israel, also made a choice to give their lives, knowing the risks, for the Jewish state and for the Jewish people. And for that reason, we are inspired by them, and we remember them each Yizkor. So with that, I'd like to continue with the Azkaros for those martyrs, and then we'll move on to the personal Yizkor. I'd like to ask Zalman to continue.